The Boys has some good scenes, and Season 3 is definitely a step up over the low bar that was Season 2, but no matter how much I try and get into the show, they keep bringing me out of it, and it's all because they're obsessed with preaching, rather than just trying to entertain.
You shouldn't be afraid of a powerful woman.
We get this article from CBR. The Boys reacts to right-wing fans realizing that the show is political satire. Except it's not political satire, is it? It's more like this is actually just the political opinion of one extreme side in Hollywood who have no idea what it's actually like to live in the real world. It's not like they're actually making jokes out of it. They're just saying literally how they see the world.
Co-captain, huh?
First female co-captain ever. I mean, think about what that would mean to millions of girls.
Now, The Boys has degenerated into what is essentially shock scene and shock scene, with just random arbitrary drivel in the middle trying to get to the next shock scene. My issue is that the drivel in the middle is all about this, and so no matter how much I try and get absorbed, no matter how much I try and get immersed in the TV show, I always get pulled out of it by the very showrunners themselves reminding me, oh, actually, we're just trying to preach to you about the real world here.
You're mostly just doing it in black neighborhoods, and you don't want people to say that you're being racist, right?
Is this like a canceled thing? Am I being canceled?
And it's not that the show is political satire at all, it's that it all comes from one direction, and only one direction. The perfect example is how in one of the early episodes they had a character that was clearly meant to be a sort of southern Texas gun-toting superhero who was just obsessed with firearms.
Step 1, oppress the citizens and confiscate their firearms. Have it all gleefully reported by the so-called news media. Good for us and the Vought Rifle Association.
And he was definitely the butt of the joke in that scene. But just before that very same scene, they'd gone to an inclusive fair, which had shops such as the Woke Walk, and not a single joke was ever made. One was pitched as, this is what's important, this is what the world should be like. And the other was pitched as something that was meant to be joked about. The problem isn't that the show is satire. The problem is that it's preaching, because they can't actually take a joke themselves. And boy, would they be very sensitive about taking jokes themselves, because not only do we go down to this tweet, where you see the Boys subreddit is in chaos right now, threads are getting locked, users are rage deleting whole accounts, it's amazing, they're whining about no politics and entertainment, but it's impossible to talk about the show without them now. Why is it impossible to talk about the show without them now? Because the showrunners have deliberately made it that way. That is their intention. Now The Boys is just a platform to push their own ideas, and they're proud of it. That's why The Boys themselves retweeted this very same thread to brag about the destruction that they had caused to the IP. So what caused the Reddit explosion? Why were people suddenly once again thrust into the realm of, can you please just shut your mouth for once in your life and make something entertaining, rather than feeling like you've got to educate the universe, because they are so ideologically obsessed that they can't even keep it out of their own entertainment for 5 seconds. Because when the personal is political, it becomes their duty to inject it into everything.
Finally, I could have some real power that I could use, do some real good. Someone needs to stand up to this guy.
And this is why the subreddit blew up, because they came out and admitted that Homelander was just meant to be Trump. Now, as you can tell, I'm British. I don't have a dog in the fight of who leads that country over there. I don't vote, although I can have an opinion on it. It's not really something that I'm bothered about that much. I don't have a dog in this fight. What I do have a dog in, though, is my entertainment. And so if every time I see Homelander, or you humiliating Homelander, or Homelander doing basically anything, and suddenly I've got to start thinking about American politics from the UK when I don't want to, that becomes a problem, because now it's not entertaining. Now I'm thinking about the real world because you forced me to, rather than the universe of The Boys. If the purpose of entertainment is escapism, I'm trying to get immersed in the entertainment, in the escapism, and you're just pulling me right back out of it and forcing me to be thinking about something that you find important when nobody else does. Because if they found it that important, they'd be thinking about that, not The Boys. But don't worry, because Homelander has always meant to represent him. I'll admit to being a little more bold this season than I have in past seasons, because we know nobody wants this as entertainment. So we lured in the audience with an entirely different show, and then we just pulled the mask off to reveal our degenerate, rotting faces. And why is he doing it? Because the world is getting more coarse and less elegant. The urgency of our team's writing reflects that. Oh no! The orange man still exists in the world, and so I have to preach to people in the United Kingdom about it for some reason. I'm sorry that you've got two brain cells and they're desperately rubbing up against each other, trying to make enough friction so they don't freeze to death in the cold, but I really don't understand why your show, which is meant for international audiences, has to be obsessed with your own delusions. We're angrier, you're angrier, and more scared, you're just a coward, as the year goes on. So that has been reflected in our writing. Have you considered stopping writing because you seem to be really bad at it? But part of where Homelander's story naturally goes is this really combustible mix of weakness and insecurity, which you're absolutely not just projecting onto him because your feelings of a real-world personality where you shouldn't have done it in the first place. So you're destroying a character because you're obsessed with the real world, because you see him to be something else. Although I have to admit, if you do really hate a person, then you probably shouldn't have made him a superhero with a six-pack. All he wants to be is the most powerful person he can be, even though he's completely inadequate in his abilities to handle it. Because that's how you wrote him. But don't worry, because it really turns out that Eric Kripke is just a discriminatory bigot. He continued, "It's the white male victimization, an unchecked ambition." No wonder he's so scared. He's got some people hiding under his bed thinking they're the boogeyman. Oh no, I go out into the street and I'm just petrified by people that can tan. And those issues just happen to reflect the guy who, it's just still so surreal to say it, was a president of the United States. I have no idea if this guy was actually on some kind of illegal substance when he wrote this stuff, but what I do know is I'd probably seek help, because you seem to have completely and utterly lost the plot. The more awful public figures act, the more fans they seem to be getting. Have you considered that they're actually getting popular because they're doing something good, and you might be the baddies? So that's a phenomenon we wanted to explore. And that Homelander is realizing he can actually show them who he really is, and they'll love him for it. Whenever you're in an argument with someone and you're talking about a topic, and then someone brings up a random analogy, they're generally using it because they can't argue with the original point, and so they try and use an analogy which they can surround in some kind of mysticism and make a different angle. They want to add a layer of separation in there, so it becomes a little bit removed. They can alter the point and generally argue from a disingenuous position. Because if they weren't going to do that, they could just stay on the original topic as it was, and that is what's happened with Homelander. No one is going to argue that Homelander is a good guy. He's clearly not a good guy. But what they've done is created their own straw man, created their own evil person, and then gone, oh no, he's the orange man! And then they use their straw man, the evil character that they created, to then go and attack all of the fans of the other guy, just because they think they're exactly the same. This isn't satire. This is how they genuinely see the original person. That's why they can flick between the two and the fans of both so easily. They can switch without a hint of irony from talking about Homelander and what makes him evil to talking about the people who support someone in real life as if they're the same thing and the same person. That isn't satire. That's deluded. And I love self-deprecating humor. I think if you can make a joke, you've got to be able to take it. It's fair enough. And if they did both sides, I'd have no issue with it. But when it's so obviously one-sided, that's when you bring me out of the entertainment. It's not a joke anymore. This is what you believe. And if you want proof it's one-sided, you only have to look at the other side. How they're so proud that another leader watches them and thinks it's great, and they think about it all the time, even when they're writing the show. More than once in editing and post-production, the thought came up many times, can you imagine him watching this scene right now and what he must be thinking? And I can fully understand why they were thinking about what he'd be thinking, because it's absolutely right up their street. How they turn superhero conventions on their head to lay bare issues of biological chemistry, capitalism, and the distorting effects of corporate power and mass media. Except once again, only from one side. That's why you get a character which Amazon just invented so they can talk about an issue which, once again, was a personal problem of theirs and added literally nothing to the show, coming out and using words that other people have used, such as lamestream media, because when it comes to the boys, the journalistic class are obviously very important people that we should all respect. Can't go calling them the lamestream media because these are people of virtue. And it's not just part of the show that's like this. They don't just add in the odd topic or the odd reference. It's literally built into the very DNA of the script itself, into the storylines. What little story they actually is. Because The Boys showrunner discusses how the show deals with addiction and toxic masculinity. Now, you're gonna have to forgive me a little bit, because I would just assume, without having looked it up, that The Boys would generally be watched by boys. Call me crazy, but I think a show about superheroes, gore, and violence is generally going to lean towards one half more than the other. So it seems strange then that when you have this audience, for some reason, you just want to denigrate them and tell them how awful they are for being masculine. And yet that is apparently what the temporary Compound V allows them to do. Because it was specifically designed to address these issues. This is what the entire series is about. If you look hard enough, you can see the hands of the screenwriter on the idea. Because they say that in the comics, they actually have powers themselves, but in this, they didn't. Because they wanted to show later on, they're literally getting addicted to toxic masculinity. It could come at great cost, and you could watch the degeneration of the characters. You've heard it here first. Masculinity is degenerate. Yes, the inbuilt drive to create, provide, and protect is apparently now toxic. It does seem like toxic over the last years has really just replaced rude. And rude always just meant you're doing something which I don't like, so I'm trying to shame you into stopping it. Whereas toxic has all of that built in, along with the idea that we can also try and get someone to make it illegal for you to do it in the first place. So that'll be fun. And by illegal, I just meant you get some kind of authority figure to ban it on platforms or games or wherever else they happen to have gained power this week. And they are absolutely obsessed with the whole idea of it. When they go, Butcher and Huey, they're not the only characters in the season weighed down by toxic masculinity. No, Ackles, who plays Soldier Boy, explores the root causes behind it. So often, power means frothing as this macho illusion that never existed. Now you know, masculinity never really existed. Oh no, it's all just an illusion that men instinctually put up due to tens of thousands of years of evolution. Yes, it actually doesn't exist. It never happened. It's just society tells men they should, and so they do. Yes, it's a social creation. Yeah, despite the fact that you could put a man in a forest and he could raise himself and he would still come out with the same mannerisms. No. Suddenly, we'd all end up just like women if we hadn't been broken by society early on. The idea is ridiculous. Especially in the States, we put so much stock in the Western cowboy John Wayne Marlboro Man myth. But really, it's nonsense. Yes, what we need to be is pathetic soy pieces of trash who just snowflakes that melt on the wind and can't handle life or any problem that's thrown at us. No, what he really needs to be, his perfect vision of a man, is someone that just goes on Twitter and rees constantly about every single little problem that may have offended them this week. Behold, the ideal version of man. Because who else is there? There are 2 female superheroes in the 7, and both of them are good. That's some odds, isn't it, considering every single man there isn't?
Finally, I could have some real power that I could use, do some real good. Someone needs to stand up to this guy.
Oh, except A-Train, where they're trying to convince you that actually now he is good. Can't imagine why. It's almost as if we can actually judge morality and who's going to be good and bad just by looking at arbitrary characteristics before the series has even aired. That's always fun and interesting for an entertainment series. But hey, I mean, we did it with Wheel of Time and Halo and Obi-Wan Kenobi and now The Boys. Yeah, being predictable's really, great. Especially when they're so obsessed with trying to subvert expectations and yet do everything that everybody thinks they're going to. It's interesting, that. And being an NPC with a script that just pumps out the same generic responses over and over again because you've got to have the same opinion as everyone else in Hollywood, otherwise you're never going to get work, leads to boring, predictable entertainment where everybody knows what you're going to do. This is why you're so obsessed with trying to subvert expectations. Because you know you're predictable. You know everyone knows what you're going to do. And so this is why you have to come up with the most ridiculous things that you can actually try and do to either deliberately annoy them, not only because you hate your fanbase, but because you hate that they outwit you. You hate that you're so predictable. You hate that actually you're just another generic clone in the hive mind who can't even think for themselves. And that is why every single one of these articles, every single one of these interviews just reads like any other member of the hive mind. There's not a single sentence, a single phrase, and not a single answer filled with the typical buzzwords that you find all over the place. Because quite frankly, these aren't your thoughts. These aren't your original creations. These are just things you've heard elsewhere and then just started to puke out all over the page. And so while The Boys isn't like Kenobi, it doesn't reek of incompetence. The people in it can act. It has some good scenes. It's just the problem is the same as always. The problem is the people at the top. The problem is the people that can't keep themselves out of the show because, quite frankly, they're not interesting. They're not entertaining and seem to be going through some kind of weird psychological break. And this is why, no matter how good parts of the show could be, certain scenes of the show can be, I always get pulled out of it. Because I always get reminded of the creators of the show, rather than actually being able to just engage with the show itself. If you want to see what it's like when people are weak and insecure, horrible, obsessed with power and ambition, then Eric Kripke should really just be looking at himself. Because you can try and come out and make it seem like being a man is a bad thing. Sort of emotional repression, you know, stoicism, one of the key aspects of being an actual man. And really, you just come across as someone who's incredibly insecure and desperately trying to take it out on the world because you have your own paranoid delusions. This is the problem with satire. If you really want to try and humiliate people, then they've actually got to respect you. Because if I don't respect you, then I'm certainly not going to respect your opinion. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.